It's great to have a full crowd here. See all those people laughing? But thank you for coming for the first forum that we're going to hold as sort of a pre-town meeting event, give an opportunity for our residents to come and hear a little bit about the different articles that will be on the town meeting warrant on May 7th. Ask questions. Really, the effort is really designed to provide some additional information that folks may want to help them better understand different warrant articles. So when they show up at town meeting, they have a good understanding of that, and really when we ask them to make important decisions, they feel well informed to be able to make those decisions, because town meeting can move sometimes at a rather rapid pace, and it's difficult sometimes to show up there and just be seeing information for the first time. Typically our May town meeting is a little bit larger than the one we do in the fall. The biggest piece of that really is a lot of the budget type stuff that we need to put in place for the upcoming fiscal year. This town meeting warrant is no different. So there's 29 articles on the warrant. There's 26 warrant articles and 3 citizens petitions that are also on the town meeting warrant as well. So we're going to step through. I have a number of folks with me. We'll just ask them to each introduce themselves. They may have a piece of different warrant articles, can answer particular questions related to their areas of expertise. So Eric, why don't we start with you?
How you doing? Eric Heidemann, Director of Public Facilities.
Matt Strasberg, Town Planner.
Tony Schiavi, Town Manager.
Michael Herbert, Assistant Town Manager.
Beth Rosenblum, Chair, Community Preservation Committee.
Great. So first up, we'll start off with just briefly on Article 2. That's our annual article where we make supplemental appropriations to the FY14 budget, which is the year that we're currently in. Typically, that particular warrant article is a work in progress and really doesn't become finalized until the night of town meeting, as we're looking at our current budget items and any transfers that we're going to request town meeting make from one appropriation to another. So we have a number of those, not a large number, but we'll be firming up those numbers sometime next week, and we'll present that article at the town meeting with the final accounts that we'll look to make different transfers to. So that one's a work in progress. Hopefully everybody picked up a piece of the budget. It's about a 4-page document. That'll get input into the warrant article that's printed at town meeting. I'll give kind of a brief overview and perhaps have Michael address a little bit about the budget process this year. We've talked about it a number of times, really a much different process than we've used in the past, really a zero-based, outcome-focused approach, which essentially challenged our normal way that we typically think of budgets, or at least the way they were done in the past, where departments would basically start with what they started last year, or we started with how much money do we have available, to really start off at a zero-based level, where they really needed to think about what is it, what's their core mission, what is it that they need to be providing to those that they serve, their constituents, whether it's Department of Public Works, whether it's Public Safety, or any other department, and then build a budget around those priorities and the things that they needed to do, and that allows everybody to see the rationale and the purpose behind the budget based on the things that they're going to receive as part of that process. And that allowed us to make a number of investments in different parts of our town budget, because money wasn't necessarily always in the right places in the different departments, and allowed us to make some investments because of that. And so we had a very modest 2.8% increase in the overall budget for next year, and about a 3.8% increase in the general government budget, which is what we're really focused on here tonight, not the school part of the budget per se. So that what you'll see through the budget is numbers that are different than maybe what they've been in the past. You'll see that we actually put the actual end of year numbers for FY13, which is something the residents had asked for. How did we finish up last year or the year prior? So you'll see in the budget we give the FY13 actuals, we give the FY14 annual town meeting appropriations that were done a year ago, and then we talk about the town manager budget, which is the FY15 budget. And if you have an opportunity, Michael did a wonderful job putting together this particular document, which is what we call our budget book, which is the FY15 budget and our capital plan. Gives a tremendous amount of detail about what I just spoke about and how the budget was put together, but it includes all the objectives that each of the department heads needed to establish, which is what they built their budget around, and those were aligned with my strategic priorities and objectives that I put out back in the fall. So it really is a puzzle that fits all together, I think, rather nicely, gives everybody an idea of what the expectations are from each of our departments and how their budget relates to that. So I'll pass it over to Michael to get into a little bit more of the details and then perhaps cover some of the highlights of some of the investments that we're going to make through this FY15 budget process.
Sure, thank you. I think Tony pretty much covered the process and kind of the benefits of an outcomes-based approach. And so what I'll do is I'll just go briefly through, I'm not going to go through every line item, but basically tell you some of the investments that we've been able to make into our town through this approach. Again, it's much more targeted and much more efficient, I think, to do it this way than just your zero-based approach, because it allows you to establish goals and objectives and priorities, determine what your core mission is, what you're trying to do as a department, and then fund it accordingly. And so you take funding that might not be being spent efficiently or towards a greater purpose and putting it towards an item that will have a greater purpose. So that being said, just to go briefly through the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager's budget, that's going to be the first item you see. You'll see an increased investment there in economic development. We're going to be looking at developing an economic plan, an economic development roadmap for the coming year. So that's located within that budget. I'll go down to Town Council. You'll see that budget increased significantly from last year. Again, we think this is a prudent move based on previous year's expenditures and also what we anticipate coming up in the future, especially with regards to the fact that we are going to be renegotiating 4 labor contracts. You'll see an increased investment in data processing. We currently have one person who pretty much does everything in terms of IT in Town Hall, is responsible for not only the long-term planning, but putting out all the day-to-day fires that happen. And so you can imagine that person spends most of the time putting out fires. So as a result, we can't really plan, we can't really get ahead of where we want to go from an IT standpoint. And so you'll see an increased investment there. Town Clerk, you'll see the line item changes just because of some internal staffing moves. Public buildings, you actually see a reduction, but this is an important line item because a couple of things are happening within this budget, and if you get the budget book, you'll be able to see the detail of this. So first of all is the town is, for the first time, I think, in several years, meeting its commitment with its agreement with the school department to jointly fund a Director of Public Facilities position. So that is included there. I think over the coming year, the school department and town management will be looking at creating a more formalized joint public facilities department, but this is the first step towards that process. But you'll also see, when you get into the detail, you'll also see a reduction in our utility expenses. And that's critical in the fact that we're utilizing Amoresco, a performance contract, which actually comes down later through the warrant. The savings that we're accruing through that performance contract is realized in this line item. And I think I'll probably wait till we get to the Amoresco article before we really discuss that. Let's see. Benefits and insurance, that went up about 7.5% this year. This is a routine budget buster. The town made some strides a couple years ago in changing employee health plans, which helped us realize a savings. Unfortunately, those were short-term, short-lived, and so now we're looking again at a $700,000 increase in total. I think $400,000 of that is in health insurance. We're going to be looking at options in the coming year on ways we can start to rein in those costs a little better.
Yeah, one of the things, I don't know if folks had an opportunity, I did tape my State of the Town address, so it's up on our website, it's up on WACA-TV, and there are actually some charts in the budget book that represent that. We had about a $1.2 $3 million increase overall in our new revenue for next year, over half of that was taken up through benefits and fixed costs. So that's going to be an important area that we're going to need to focus on to make sure that we get those costs, when I say under control, but look at other options for that, because it's one of those that we see starting to climb at a pretty steep rate, that we need to address that this coming year.
And so moving on down to financial services, the town accountant line item changes, that's related to the town clerk line item changes. Again, some personnel shifts that we're looking to make. Let's see. Oh, I should go back up to the finance reserve fund. You'll see a decrease of $134,500 in that. The reason we decided to do that is twofold. First, we wanted to take the money that would generally be appropriated to the legal budget at the end of the year and basically just make that reflection here at the beginning of the year. So we budgeted legal counsel appropriately at $190,000. We took $65,000 from directly off of the finance reserve fund to offset that. Second, we reduced it to help balance the budget. We feel like we can live within this standard right here. So moving to development services, you'll see a change in Conservation Commission. Previously, some salaries or part of the funding for our Conservation Commission and Director of Community Development and Health positions were being taken out of the capital budget. We've moved that now back into the appropriate line item. Planning Board, you'll see an increase there. That is seed funding, if you will, for a junior planner position. I think one of the things that we're seeing in Town Hall is an increase in development activity. And so what has happened is that our town planner is currently focused on day-to-day events at the expense of long-term planning. So we hope this will start to help rectify that situation and free up Nat's time to, again, help focus more on a long-term vision for the town, in conjunction with several of the boards and committees that are currently working on that, notably the Comprehensive Plan Committee. The Inspectional Services Department, you'll see, well, that just goes up moderately. I think there's some shifts there in terms of some increases in certain line items offset through other line items. Again, that's in more of the detail piece. If you go to, let's see, street lighting, you'll see a reduction in that line item. That is, again, related directly to Amoresco. That performance contract, we're looking at replacing all of the street lights in town. We're hoping to realize a significant savings, but we felt that this was the appropriate amount to budget in terms of risk management vis-a-vis savings. Let's see, the combined fuel account goes up just to reflect increased costs there. The Board of Health, you'll see an increase of about a little over $8,000. We are, for the first time in many years, funding a part-time public health nurse whose job it will be to do more proactive and preventive health strategies like clinics. We'll also be doing some communicable disease monitoring, a number of other, again, proactive public health measures. I'm hoping that that person will also really focus on opiate addictions and work in conjunction with, again, our Director of Youth and Family Services and our Police Department.
There's some senior clinics in there too, right, for the
Correct.
seniors? Right.
Some senior clinics. That brings us down to the Council on Aging. That is one of those areas that we targeted through the meals tax, and this increased investment is reflected there. It goes up about $17,000. Through that, and you'll see some of the performance measures and some of the things that they're going to be able to accomplish through the budget book. But we're going to be increasing transportation options for seniors. We're also going to be increasing outreach hours, and we have some metrics associated with that, including how many new volunteers we're going to start bringing into the senior center, on a monthly basis, and also how many people we're reaching out to and impacting on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I think important to perhaps highlight a little bit on many of the departments for their goals and objectives, the things that we help them establish that are actually measurable, so that we're able to actually see the impact of the dollars that they get, and we can actually track that. And that's our plan through both our performance management program as well as other data tracking, so that when we say we're going to use this money to reach X number of people, we want to measure that to see how we're doing and did we achieve our objective. And if we did, great, and we stretch that the next year. Or if we didn't, let's figure out why, so that we can then achieve whatever that goal happened to be. So that's part of what the accountability that's going to be put on the department heads as they develop their budget is they got to report back on that to see how did they actually do what they said they were going to do, and how did those goals actually get achieved or not.
And there's also increased programming there. I think one of the things Joanne Duffy, our Director of Senior Services, has mentioned is that there is this dramatic increase of people walking through the door looking for caregiver support. Those people who are taking care of elderly parents, maybe disabled parents. And so there's programming in there designed to help bolster those services, and then also more of a lifelong learning component added to the programming elements there. Skip down to Veteran Services, you'll see a $35,000 increase there. Over the course of the past year, we've seen a dramatic increase in veterans applying for benefits. We're mandated to provide those benefits. The opposite end of the spectrum is, fortunately, the following year we're usually reimbursed, and I don't see this changing, reimbursed 75% of what we spend. But nevertheless, we still have to put those upfront costs in the budget, and so that is why that has increased. The library budget has increased, again, due to the meals tax. We're going to expand the library hours. It's open by 5 on Friday. That's going to do a number of things. It's going to allow us to do a number of children's programs, but just as importantly, it's going to allow us to go off the state's waiver list. We've been operating under a waiver for 7 years now. The Board of Library Commissioners at the state is getting tired of granting it. We're tired, frankly, of having to ask for it. So that investment, again, is noted here. There's also $5,000 in that line item for increased materials. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let Tony do public safety.
So in the public safety side, in the police department, Chief Davis being in his first year, we really completely revamped the police department budget. It was not anywhere close to reflective with the work that the police department needed to do, both in terms of their overtime to cover their patrols, their training, their equipment. The entire budget really was redone. We had a hearing in front of the Finance Committee, and Chief Davis ran through the way that the budget was developed to ensure that not only do we have proper staffing, but that they're getting the proper training. Some of their software and equipment, they were budgeted at like $7,500, and just the basic core system that the police department uses to connect with 911 and the criminal database, just to maintain that system is $14,000 a year. So the budgets were just totally out of whack, and so now Chief Davis has brought that budget into a more realistic format based on the needs of the department and in those particular areas, and did, I think, an outstanding job in his first year. I think the only reason it really wasn't highlighted before is there were so many vacancies in the police department that there was extra funding there just because of the fact that they had those vacancies. So they've hired 6 new officers in the last 6 months. I expect that they'll be fully staffed within the next year, which will be great for the police department. We're also addressing some of the deficiencies within their buildings through our capital plan to give them a good working environment and some life safety issues for both the officers and those that visit the police department on occasion to make sure that we're meeting mandated state laws for things like ventilation within our holding cells and those kind of things. Very important activities. So that's for the police department, and they're doing excellent work over there. Under the fire department, their increase, most of that was structured around contractual increases, with also some increase in their overtime based on the increased demand for service and coverage for our fire department. One of the things I just mentioned on the contractual side, we were able to negotiate one-year extensions with each of our fire, police, and Department of Public Works unions for the coming year. They were expiring this June. We felt it important that we get at least one full budget cycle that we developed under our belt, and the unions were very cooperative with us, and I thank the presidents of each of those unions for working with us and understanding really the importance of letting us get our feet on the ground and getting one full budget under our belt as we get ready next year to negotiate new 3-year contracts with each of those unions. So that was, I think, very key for us in developing this year's budget to have that type of collaboration.
Okay. I'll just go briefly through debt service. You're going to see a reduction in our excluded debt. That is due directly to the refunding of debt we did recently. Thanks to our increased bond rating and some, our history, our track record of excellent financial management, we were able to basically drop our total interest, our true interest costs from, around 4.5% down to a little over 2%. So that's going to be reflected here. So you'll see a decrease in excluded debt, even with the addition of those school roofs and the two in the Ashland Public School System, and then as well as Keefe Tech. The capital equipment and projects line item goes down, but I'm actually going to let Tony speak to that because I think you will see that there's a much more developed and transparent, if you will, plan that's actually published in the back of the budget book.
So as many of you may know, last year the board, approved my request to reestablish our Municipal Improvement Committee or our Capital Improvement Committee as a way to assist in the development of the town's capital plan and to put that system in place where the capital plan that is developed, inside of our office, for the folks that have capital projects like Department of Public Works, the police, and the fire, that to then go through the Municipal Improvement Committee for verification, question answering, if you will, and have them essentially stamp off on the capital plan based on the numbers of requests that we get. We certainly got more requests than we had funding for, so they assisted in the prioritization of those particular projects that eventually got funded that you'll see in the budget book. And as we move forward, through the year, if there are changes in that capital plan, then that needs to go through that Capital Improvement Committee or the Municipal Improvement Committee for, essentially a sign-off on that, should that come up, and I think helps to add to the transparency, but also some of the oversight also in the way the capital plan is actually executed, with the plan being each year succeeding. As we put in a new capital plan, we report on the previous year's capital plan on how we actually utilize our capital expenses, throughout the course of the year. For next year, we've typically been budgeting about a little over $810,000. We took a small decrease this year in our capital plan as we get that capital plan up to speed. We felt we could take a small reduction there. Our goal, obviously, is moving forward is to get that back up to that rate. One of the things that this year's capital plan will be different from any previous one is it's actually going to include school projects and town projects at the same time. The school did not have a capital program really of any substance or a capital plan. They're now included in the town's capital plan. So as you look through that, you'll see a combination of both town capital projects as well as some very important school capital projects as well. Also in the budget process, when we get into the fall town meeting, as we execute our financial reserve policy that was established last year between the Board of Selectmen, the School Committee, and the Finance Committee, there'll be a portion of, of that free cash that'll then go as a supplemental to the capital program, again, in a prioritized way through the Municipal Improvement Committee, and that'll give us sort of a second, smaller infusion of capital available in the fall that'll still follow the capital plan and some of the projects that we perhaps didn't have the ability to fund at the outset. So there's a lot of capital needs in town. There's been a lot of I won't say neglect in a negative term, but there's been a lot of capital things that just haven't been addressed, and it's really important. We have a lot of new facilities, a lot of nice facilities, and if capital starts to fall by the wayside in maintenance of those facilities, it ends up costing the town and the taxpayers more, really in the long run. So Eric, as the Public Facilities Director, has done a great job of bringing our attention to many, many of those items, both in the town buildings as well as our school buildings.
There are two specific projects I really want to highlight. One is that through the capital budget. First is the what's called Commonwealth Citizens Connect. It's a smartphone app, but you can also access it through the website where citizens can report different town issues, and they can monitor in real time how those are being fixed. So, for example, if you see a pothole, on West Union Street, and you actually have the time to get out and take a picture of it. Now that's another story altogether. You won't have an app for that, but you will actually be able to take a picture of that, and that will be routed to our DPW department, and they will get that, initiate a work order, fill that, and then let you, basically send a message back, basically saying, okay, this has been done. So we're looking at, a number of different requests. We can utilize this app for street lights being out, trash, and potholes, just a number of them. The second is a online permitting system, which serves two purposes. First, it helps those who are applying for permits see exactly what they need to do and what process they need to follow to get the proper permits for whatever it is they're trying to do. Second, it allows people to go and check in on different projects and see where those projects are in the permitting process. So again, we see that as being a win-win situation on a number of different levels. I'll touch briefly upon the education budget. That goes up a little less than 3%. The school department has done a good job in trying to start to meet some of the needs that they have articulated over the years. Mainly an additional math teacher at the high school, as well as the restoration of their library program. And I'll touch base on two enterprise funds. The sewer enterprise fund goes up over $300,000. That is largely due to our assessment from the MWRA and the town of Framingham to transport and treat our sewage. This is becoming an increasingly onerous issue that we have to deal with, and that is one of the reasons why we are looking at establishing a wastewater treatment facility here in town. Second is the solid waste enterprise fund. You'll see that actually goes down from the previous year, and that's because we've been able to renegotiate our trash contract to where we're going to be saving $250,000 over the next 3 years. But not only that, we're going to be able to increase services. So residents will be getting 2 extra yard waste pickups a year, and then they are also going to reimburse us for establishing our SHARPS program with the Board of Health. So currently, if you want to properly dispose of SHARPS, you have to get a special package, mail it in. There's an increased cost to residents there. They will handle that free of charge. And actually, because of the savings that we're able to realize there, we're actually going to be able to reduce trash fees for regular households by $10, and by the senior trash fee by $8. So we're really happy and proud of that. So.
All right. The only thing additional I wanted to mention, which isn't in this budget, but you'll see it in the budget that is in Article 3 for town meeting. One of the things that we had made a commitment on was to begin to reverse our reliance on money from the reserve, from the stabilization fund to fund operational expenses. So last year it was $515,000 taken out of essentially our rainy day fund or our stabilization fund. We had made a commitment to start to address that and reverse that trend. This year we're taking out about 450,000. So we've reduced that reliance by 65,000, and we're going to continue to trim that down to make sure that we're living within our means and really avoid having to take that large of a amount of money out of our, stabilization fund to fund operating expenses. It's really a frowned upon type of thing because that money is not necessarily guaranteed from year to year. So if you start to count on that for staffing or whatever, and it's not available in a particular year, then, you have a big problem that you have to address. So we're looking at addressing that. We're going to start this year with a $65,000 reduction in our reliance on the stabilization fund to fund this year's budget. We think that's an important investment to start to make. So let's stop there for a second and see if anybody has any particular questions about any of the line items or any of that. Yes, Joel?
A number of questions, real quick. First one I see under the planning board, I was happy to hear that we're going to put more focus on some long-range planning, but I was a little confused by seeing a total increase of only 13,000. Just how junior is this junior?
Well, one of the things that you can't make a direct correlation between the amount of increase or decrease in any particular budget, because there may have been a number of adjustments that happened. What we did when we built this budget, when the departments came in and we went through their line item by line item, Michael had his laptop out looking at historical expenses for those line items. So there was a number of line items. I'll say, for instance, it was $15,000 for X. Department head comes in with $15,000 for X. When we look historically and say we've historically over the last several years only spent $9,000. We reduced that from 15 to 9. So there were a lot of internal savings that happened in each of the budgets. So it's some of the investments that we're making and things you heard can't be directly related to the amount that a budget may have gone up or gone down based on that, because there may have been other adjustments inside of that budget to fund that.
It just seems, just to poke that one last time. That
Sure.
If I take, instead of looking at the total, if I just look at salaries and wages, it's pretty much the same increase. It's roughly an $11,000 increase. So I'm assuming that somewhere else there was salary and wages not spent based on the explanation you were given? In other words, something went down or wasn't spent before that we can absorb now for this new position.
Yes, I mean, you will see that throughout the budget. I mean, one of the things, so planning board specifically, $10,000 of the administrative assistant's salary was actually being taken out of the Board of Selectmen's budget.
Right.
So, we've shifted back that. There was also, like you said, Joel, there was money that was not being spent that was set aside in a salary account. So actually, that particular budget does not necessarily increase a lot, but what we're doing with that money is tied to something and is spoken for.
I was really happy to hear you say that we're getting off the waiver list or whatever it was called
For the library.
And are we absolutely comfortable with that? It just seems like such a small increase of, in total it's all of $18,000. Is that all it took to get off the bad guy list?
Well, part of that was we extended the hours. So, I mean, they look at a number of different factors related to, the state mandate. So we're actually, with part of that meals tax money, we're actually going to have the library open a full day on Friday. So we added 5 additional, library hours on Friday. We've added some money to their materials account as well for some of their
One kind of, I guess
inventory.
it's more thematic, but just with regard to public safety, I mean, there's a fairly substantial increase in that category. You talked about 6 more police officers being hired and so on.
Yeah, not additional police officers. We had like 10 vacancies that weren't filled. Now some of those officers were getting paid. In some cases they weren't. Now we actually have police officers on the street. So the number of officers in the police department didn't grow by 6, but he's been able to fill the vacancies that he had to actually put people on the street.
So let me ask you, I don't mean this to come across as a combative question,
Sure.
but I'm trying to really understand what you mean by performance-based budgeting, if that's the right phrasing. And if in the past year we were short-staffed and we were, 10 officers below what should have been there based on the current expect plans, is one of the metrics, I realize there's other things, the kind of equipment and technology and other things, but within the salaries area, is it reasonable to say that we're looking for better police process in our town, that there'll be either lower crime or higher quality policing? And what tools are being used to measure these things against the cost that we're talking
Sure.
about?
Well, that's part of what the performance management program that we established, which is currently being funded by the Administration and Finance. We actually have money in the budget to take that to what's called Phase 2. We just had our first, we call it ASSTAT. It's off of the CityStat program, or ASSTAT. So one of the first areas we looked at in the police department was analyzing their overtime. And so that'll expand to other aspects of what they do, as well as DPW. We started with police and DPW. It's really the two biggest departments. And so part of that performance management program is to look at different types of data to analyze and to use data-driven decision-making to make better decisions on how we do things. So we're just stepping off, if you will, on that process, but that's one of the tools that we'll use moving forward. They'll then expand to other town departments so that we're, using data to drive our, our budgets, our decision making, because, data, it's hard to argue with data. So whether it's crime statistics, motor vehicle stops, I know just when the chief briefed the finance committee, with just the addition of these officers, traffic safety has actually gone up because they've been making more traffic stops, speeders, those type of things. And so we can measure that. And that's part of what the performance management program will do for us, to allow us to measure in those important areas to see the effect of what they've asked for in their budget. And you see that through, better crime statistics and closed cases, because now you have more detectives on the job to handle cases. So that's sort of where the outcomes-based budget is. That outcome of that can be tied directly back to the funding that the department gets in particular areas. Hopefully that makes sense. But
And one last quick one.
sure.
This is probably for Beth, but anybody else who wants to. You talk about capital planning, municipal budgets and capital planning. And the idea of it is that you've got to sort of set stuff aside for a rainy day and not just be coming out of current revenues every year and have a longer term plan. And Beth and I have discussed this numerous times, that my view is that we don't do that based on the way the CPA is set up, that it's really on a first come, first served basis. So if I were arguing totally hypothetically for bike paths and setting aside funding out of the CPA, let's say, totally, wild.
Totally hypothetical.
Picked it out of the sky. The question I have is, has the town looked at capital budgeting as it relates to CPA type projects? I mean, I realize there's a governance issue embedded underneath that, but I just feel like if we're looking at parks and recreation and other types of, and affordable housing and other things,
Right.
that we don't do any capital planning. It's whoever comes forward with a proposal, that money goes out, and when the next guy comes along, there might not be anything there. So where's the planning, I guess is the question. And I don't know, I just hope that we can address this in some way.
I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
Well, I actually, looking through this just now, I actually noticed that there's $250,000 set aside or earmarked under open space for field and trail upgrades. So I'm guessing that there finally is some intention and planning going on, at least at your level, to be looking at townwide. I was really surprised to see that. Certainly, CPA at this point can't take credit for this.
Well, I think, Joel, if I understand your comment / question, I think Beth has kind of been hit from several different angles on this, and trying to, possibly develop a 5- and 10-year plan for CPA funding, because just the feedback that I'm hearing is that, we do kind of have these one-off projects, if you will, I think, that, I'm not dismissing those or saying they do not have merit, but where do those fall into the larger picture? Where do those fit into the larger scope? And I think, as the comprehensive plan committee moves forward, and it looks like we're going to have funding to, kind of revise our open space and rec plan. I think once some of those start being updated and come more into fruition, you'll have a roadmap to which you can tie a 5- and 10-year capital improvement plan to.
okay. Anybody else questions on the budget?
I have a quick question about data processing. Does that mean that you are hiring new personnel or moving personnel for the IT position?
We're using contracted services for that, so we're not bringing on an FTE. We're using an outside agency to help handle the day-to-day processing and the triaging of IT issues, which will then allow our IT director, Scott Motika, to focus more on long-term planning. He will still be involved in day-to-day issues. There's just no other way around it. But you know, it is unfair to ask him to start coming up with a more robust long-term plan when he's, you know, spending, you know, 60 hours a week, you know, putting out fires.
Now, think of it like a help desk, you know, kind of thing for that.
That explains it better, thank you.
All right, moving on to Article 4, just, you know, briefly, these are standard warrant articles, the revolving funds. We go through these every year. The numbers and the amounts for the different revolving funds have not changed from what you saw last May. So those revolving funds, you know, if you read through those, basically handle the normal receipts and deposits that come through for like the Council on Aging when they hold classes and that sort of thing, and they collect, you know, receipts for different classes and rentals for Council on Aging programs, Community Center, the Animal Control Revolving Fund as well. It's very similar. Let me see, you have the Library Materials, Hazardous Waste Revolving Fund, the Planning Board, which typically goes towards, you know, sidewalks and those type of things get put into an account for different projects. And then you have a couple from, one from the high school, and then two from the Board of Health, the Food Establishment Program, as well as the Tobacco Control Program. So those are ones that we see pretty much every year. Article 5, there'll be, I think, one election available for the Ashland Redevelopment Authority to fill the seat, I believe, by Graham Ruggie. So they'll handle that. Articles 6 and 7, again, are annual authorization articles that authorize either the Board of Selectmen and the Town Manager to enter into different grant programs, road contracts, as well as contracts that may be in excess of 3 years for particular reasons. And then Article 7 is for the town and the school, or the Board of Selectmen and the school committee to grant easements across different pieces of property for drainage and sewer and utility purposes. Those wordings are standard from 1 year to the next. There's no questions on those. I'll let Beth talk. There's 9 CPA articles on the warrant for May.
Yeah, and the first 4 are the typical ones you're seeing every year. The first one is the annual appropriation. As you know, each year we have to put aside 10%. We have to set aside 10% of the incoming revenues into the 3 buckets, and then the remaining 70% into the undesignated reserve account. So that's the first warrant article. And we're anticipating next year to be receiving just $1 million from, that includes state match as well as the local revenues. Approximately, it's about $750,000 that we take in from the local property tax revenues. And the state, the CPA Coalition at this point is anticipating about a $250,000 match. It will all be dependent on whether or not our legislature decides to appropriate an additional $25 million into the state CPA fund or not. We won't know that for a few months. That would change that amount if that comes to fruition. Article 9 is the first of 3 bond payments. As you all know, we purchased property adjacent to the town forest off of Oak Street. I think it was in 2002? 2002. Yep. So that is a 20-year bond. And this year, each year the bond payment goes down slightly. This year the bond payment is $212,275. So if we've been paying since 2002, it's going to be all paid up in 20 years, which is 2022. Article 10 is for the high school fields. This is the bond payment that we approved in 2011, and because it was a recreation project, the bond debt we're only allowed to take out for 15 years as opposed to the typical 20-year bond. So we have 15 years to pay on this, and this year the bond payment is $369,250, and I believe initially we spent, I think it was $7.5 million on the high school fields. So, excuse me. So Article 11 is for the Warren Woods land acquisition, and that, again, is a 20-year bond. And that comes, the other two are coming all out of the undesignated account. Warren Woods is coming out of 3 different resource accounts: historic resource, open space, and undesignated. And this year, the payment is $189,375. So that will be due, that will have paid that in full in 2031. So we still have a ways to go. Article 12 came to us from the Ashland Field Management Group, and they actually were originally seeking $150,000 to do field improvements on Stone Park, Mendez, Middle, and I think that was the 3. We negotiated and compromised with them to reduce that to $135,000. And according to the AFMG group, this will allow them to meet all of the expectations that were set forth in their field study report several years ago. So this should be satisfactory to the community for at least the next 10 years. We should be able to meet all of our field needs, and hopefully you agree with that at the end of the table as far as you know. So, and Nick will speak to this in detail at town meeting, but a summary of what this is going to fund is listed in the article. Article 13 is for the purchase of the property which is currently adjacent to Marathon Park, in between the VFW and the existing Marathon Park. And it's for the actual cost for the purchase of the property, which has been negotiated by town management, is $250,000. And we were asked to fund some additional monies, to put some additional monies towards that for legal costs, for demolition costs, and for engineering costs. Because as we know, if we purchase it, we want to create it. We want to expand Marathon Park and create a park. So we can't have a house on a property if we want to create a park. So that is for $275,000. Article 14 came to us from the Historical Commission. And let's see. Oh, actually, no, this was from the town clerk's office. The Historical Commission gave their support to this article. And this is to update the current database that the town clerk's office is using to archive records in town. I think initially it was to archive historical records. We realized that all records that go through the town clerk's office at some point down the road will be historical documents. So this is a broad interpretation of how we can use CPA funds for historical purposes. Article 15 came to us from the Historical Commission, and this is phase 2 of the Telecron clock tower improvements. Last year, town meeting approved the replacement and renovation of 2 clock faces on the Telecron building, which, as we know, was Henry Warren's first office building in town. And this $27,000 is for the 3rd clock, which is right above the entrance on the corner of Route 135 and Summer, is it? No, not. Homer. On Homer. Yeah. And the reason of the additional costs is because it's going to require police detail and a crane to come in. So there's, the clock itself, I think, is substantially less, but because of the additional services we're going to need in order to replace the clock. And this is a public-private partnership. This is a privately owned building, but it helps to promote our Clocktown history. And the property owner has agreed in kind, I think, next year to make some additional improvements. There's another clock face that's missing on 135, and he's agreed to help to purchase and install one there. So all of the clocks have been replaced on that building in the next 2 years. And let's see. Article 16, which is the last community preservation article also came to us from the Historical Commission. There is a historic Revolutionary War cemetery on Route 135. I think a lot of people are not familiar with it unless they have children in the school systems, because apparently the third grade requires their students to go out and visit this cemetery. And Cynthia Winterhalter, who is a local historian, has spent a lot of time at the cemetery to determine exactly what needs to be restored and improved there. And she has come up with a fairly extensive list and has gotten really reasonable prices to do the variety of work. And there's going to be some improvements to the footstones and tomb and gravestones and signage. There is no signage that's visible. So we want to make this another destination in town. And we want to be able to promote it, so we're going to have some signage. Yes?
Where on 135 is it?
I don't know the exact address, but it is east of
That's
Metropolitan
right.
on 135.
Yeah, it's right next to St. Cecilia's.
Yes, it's right behind or in front of St.
Cecilia's,
Cecilia's.
yeah.
That cemetery right there.
Right,
Oh, I
yep.
thought it was their cemetery.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's actually a town cemetery. Yeah. So for $8,000, we can see some very radical improvements, I think. And that's it for CPA. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Joe?
When the CPA committee, it says here sponsor CPA committee,
Yes.
I have had it explained to me that what that means, which I don't think is the public perception of it, and I'm hoping at town meeting you could clarify this if you would agree, that what it means is that, I'm sorry, what the CPA's committee sponsoring of an article means is that that someone requested the article and that it met, it complied with the CPA law, and that the committee, whether they are supportive of it or not, when they sponsor it, what it means is that they are voting to put it before town meeting, whether or not they themselves or the committee approves of it.
That is correct.
And I just hope that can be clarified, that the sponsorship is not necessarily a recommendation or an opposition for that matter.
That is
And
correct.
I think that would be helpful to the public to understand
Yeah.
what your sponsorship
It
is.
means that it meets the four corners of the CPA statute, and the majority of the committee felt it was worth bringing to town meeting for a community vote.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Anybody else? All right, the next two sort of go in tandem, and Michael alluded to it earlier in his presentation, related to the Amoresco performance contract that the town is going to ask town meeting to vote in favor of, which will allow us to make over $4 million in energy-saving infrastructure improvements across the town. And the key point is at no additional cost to our taxpayers. That's the beauty of it. And so the first one will be for the town to agree to establish the Amoresco performance contract. And then the second piece really is to authorize us to enter into a financing contract to handle that. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael and to Eric to talk a little bit about the Amoresco performance contract, how it works. We're not going to go through the vast number of projects, but we're developing our list of projects through an investment-grade audit on the different projects that we would take. The streetlights will be one that we will hopefully include in that to replace all of our streetlights across towns. Tremendous savings. I think we'll realize nearly $150,000 in energy savings in 2015 by entering into this contract, and it typically will go on for 20 years and create some great savings. The other aspect of that, too, is as being a green community like Ashland is, we are mandated to reduce our energy usages by certain percentages in order to maintain our green community status. We didn't do too well in the first year. There's a variety of reasons for that, but this performance contract will not only save money, but allow us to meet our green community requirements and energy reductions throughout the town. So I don't know which one of you wants to start for. Maybe you can talk about the financing, and Eric can talk about a little bit about the projects and how that works.
There's not too much more I can add to it. Just, again, a performance contract is a creative financing mechanism where you can make a number of energy efficiency and infrastructure projects through one umbrella project, and then utilize the savings that you're realizing through reduced utility costs to pay off your financing obligations. And a critical component of that is that the savings is, again, guaranteed. So again, this is with a company called Amoresco, which is located in Framingham. They've done a number of successful projects nationwide. They've done several here in Massachusetts. I was involved with one in Lowell, which was a $21 million project. And essentially, they serve as the project manager. They serve as, for all of these upgrades. And again, so we pay them through a traditional bond payment, I guess you could say, and then they guarantee the savings that we're going to realize each year for up to 20 years, for however long your financing obligation is. And so if we do not meet those savings, they cut us a check. So if they're saying, okay, you're going to save $150,000 next year in reduced utility expenditures, and we only come up with $120,000, they cut us a check for $30,000. So again, it's a win-win situation on a number of different levels. Financially, again, it's helping us balance the budget here by reducing our total energy expenses by over $150,000. And again, from a sustainability standpoint, it's helping us to reduce our energy footprint, if you will. So, there are a number of large projects as well as a number of smaller projects. I think Eric could probably touch on some of the larger ones, maybe 2 or 3, Eric, that really kind of stand out.
Okay. Also, in addition to the green communities, this is a great mechanism for us to address some of our deferred maintenance issues and aging equipment located across the board in both the general government buildings and the school department. The lighting projects, we're going to be focused on most interior lighting, exterior lighting, lighting controls, and also, as they spoke about, the street lighting will be rolled into the project portfolio as well. The savings yielded from these projects will help to fund larger projects such as boiler systems at the middle school, which are in dire need. We'll also be aiming towards infiltration reduction and energy management systems across the entire school district, which will greatly yield energy savings. Also, we'll be focusing on computer load management, which will aid in taking advantage of shutting down computers when they're not in use. And also a big portion with energy management is controlling unoccupied settings in the buildings so we're not heating a building that has no one in it. I think that covers them well.
Any questions on him? Yes, Rob.
Are we at this point sure that, are we happy enough with the Amoresco that we think we're going to go this way? Or is this article at this particular point just a placeholder in case, and we're still going to make a decision to go ahead with this?
No, I mean, I think, so we're at a place where we're ready to move ahead with this pending town meeting approval. Amoresco is finalizing their investment grade audit. We should have that, I'm hoping, by the beginning of next week. If you've seen one of these, they are voluminous amounts of information stuffed into, a number of large 3-ring binders, but they go into each project into detail. What's being done, what the energy savings are going to be, what the monetary savings are going to be. So again, we're just finalizing that list of projects, and we hope to be ready to move forward right, on May 8th, pending successful passage of this at town meeting. Our timeline is to finalize the contract arrangements with Amoresco, get that put in place, begin construction over the summer, and hopefully complete that within a year.
So one of the other aspects of this, too, is that we've applied for an energy manager grant as well for a part-time energy manager, somebody that's experienced in this area to help oversee not just this piece of it, but also our other energy management, reduction initiatives. I think will be a great way to leverage somebody that's experienced in this area to help us manage these types of energy reduction programs will be, I think, very beneficial as well. We were just talking about it in the car today. We thought we'd hear by now. It's not a deal breaker. We can do it ourselves, but I think leveraging grant money to bring in an experienced, part-time energy manager would be very useful for us. So we're hoping to hear any time. but they don't normally, issue the grant award date. You just kind of wait till they decide to make an announcement.
So the other thing is the energy savings that you're going to create, are going to directly into the financing of the contract with Amoresco, right? So you can't really do it both ways, so I guess.
Can you repeat, Rob? I'm just trying to make sure I
The
understand.
savings do support that.
So the energy savings that you create with Amoresco on streetlights, for instance, they're gonna pay for the contract with
Yep.
Amoresco. So you don't really create those, in your budget per se. So.
Sometimes that's the case, depending on the project. In Ashland's case, we're actually arranging things to where a portion of our energy savings are going to be used to pay those financing obligations. The rest we're going to be able to realize in our budget, and that's going to help us, pay for other operational costs.
Yep. And one of the things we think, just because of the guarantee, I think you can generally think that they're fairly conservative on their energy savings because they don't want to be cutting a check. So, part of our hope is that we actually realize more savings than what actually show up in the report. So I think that's, for other folks that have done these, that's typically what ends up happening. So we could end up seeing more savings than what you see in the book.
I have a question related to that as well. So I know people aren't looking to take on more work, but you proposed a way, like there was a hopefully part-time energy manager, but have we evaluated like Ashland hiring that and doing it ourselves? Because they're making money off of this, right? And that's fine, maybe it's a service, but how do we know we're getting the value of that service?
Well, I think that'll be part of what the energy manager does. Are you saying why would we
have a
what?
deal with the Amoresco versus us do this stuff on our own? How?
Well, I'll just jump in. The manpower that would be associated with serving as a project manager for 18 different energy conservation measures. And again, those are just measures. Those are not projects. As an example, interior lighting is one energy conservation measure, but we're going to do interior lighting retrofits in a number of buildings. So you would have to have a project manager handle all of that throughout town. That's probably more than a full-time job. The second piece of that is that you would have to procure each one individually. Through a performance contract, again, you're able to do this under an umbrella project, if you will. And it's a certain section of the Massachusetts procurement laws which allow us to basically, do this turnkey, again, umbrella project that will handle this.
And I think the other part of it too, the project get done much quicker. You look at the construction part. I think we looked at it about a year. If we try to do this ourselves, it would probably take us 10 years, and we may not even get there. So it really does. Even though you're paying for a service, what you end up getting and realizing the benefits for the very long term really outweigh trying to do it yourself. It would probably not really be doable. Just the contracting part of it, if you had to contract each of these out individually, just to put out a normal contract can take 3 or 4 months for one project. This allows us to take all of those projects, bundle them together, and really get them done in a year and start realizing the savings right away.
In the article, it uses the phrase "up to 20 years." What does that mean? If the town isn't happy with the arrangement, can we exit at any time?
No, it depends on our financing arrangement. We can bond for a number of different years, but the max that we can do is 20.
Right.
Okay. And is solar at all related to this article? In other words, we last year there, and even there's a zoning article that's somewhat pertinent to this. The House Street landfill, there was discussion of solar there on town land. I've raised the issue that they have in the REI parking lot in Natick or Framingham, whatever it is. All the parking spots are covered with solar panels. It's kind of a neat location to do it. And is that something we might look at in the schools? And would that be covered by this type of agreement?
It's not one of the
No,
projects,
it's not covered by this type of agreement. We've had some initial analysis on sites that would be appropriate for solar here in town on town property, and there are only a couple of sites. But no, solar is outside the scope of this.
Okay, thank you.
The microphone, please. With my voice here. Okay, Mark Tassoni. In the other than the 14, 15 people here, What's the populace gonna be seeing from this Amoresco workings?
That's right.
How many people out here in the public gonna realize what they're gonna wanna be at town meeting? What's gonna be the end result for everybody to see what's happening?
Well, again, so a number of infrastructure upgrades are going to be made. So, for example, children in schools will hopefully, realize the benefit of
Better
a
environment.
better learning environment. Same for people in town hall and the community center and the library. The savings really, I think, is probably where the townspeople will benefit, because again, it allows us to divert money that would be spent towards utilities towards services, and whether that's to keep from cutting services in the future or to add services in the future. That's really, I think, where the bulk of the population in the town of Ashland is going to see a benefit.
And did this have anything to do with the, you tried in one town meeting, the exchange of our lower costs for bills, exchange for one sort of utilities to another. There was, I think, yeah.
Are you talking about aggregation?
Yes.
Well, aggregation isn't part of this. We actually, came off aggregation several months ago because they couldn't secure a price that was, going to be less than what NSTAR's basic service cost was. We have until May 1st, which is just next week, to see if we actually get advantageous pricing. My feeling is we're probably not. So we will, let our aggregation plan lapse. Unfortunately, what has happened with aggregation is that the Department of Public Utilities at the state level really wants to see towns enter into longer-term contracts. Our feeling is that, it makes sense to enter into aggregation if we're helping to save our residents money on their utility bills. And when you enter into long-term contracts, because it's such a volatile market in energy and electricity, we can't really guarantee that. And what we don't want to have happen is, we end up, putting people on these aggregation programs and they're not saving money over the NSTAR basic rate, and they're not happy about that. So certainly individual homeowners can do aggregation programs on their own. We've had a couple of folks come into town hall who've done that. Certainly they can do that kind of thing, and they're free to, set up different type of, length of contracts, 6 months, whatever. But that's a separate, the aggregation program's a separate thing. Right now, it's just not, they can't secure a low enough price that really would assist lowering folks' electric bills at their homes.
And this would help the town, and how long would it take for the town to see a difference for the Amoresco?
Right away.
Right away. We start seeing it in the first year. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Article 20 is the OPEB, requesting to establish an OPEB trust fund in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 32B, Section 20. We currently have, we established at the fall town meeting in 2012, a OPEB Special Purpose Stabilization Fund, which we've started putting money into. An OPEB trust is a little bit different. They both support the other post-employment benefit liability that the town has, which essentially is, the health care for retirees and so forth, different from their pensions. And the OPEB trust fund is different from a stabilization fund, and when you put money into a trust, essentially is you can't take it back out again. Whereas the special purpose stabilization fund, you put money into, but with a 2/3 vote at town meeting, you can actually take money out. Our thought is, in our discussions, to really have a two-pronged approach to not only fund our special purpose stabilization fund, but also to start looking at putting money aside essentially for new employees that come on board and start paying their OPEB liability, if you will, from the beginning, from when they start, and to allocate monies for that into the trust. What we're asking at town meeting in May is just to establish the trust. And over the course of the next 6 months, we would work to actually, develop a trust and put all the mechanisms in place that would then allow us to start putting money aside towards the OPEB trust fund for any new employees hired on the general government side in the next fiscal year in FY15. So I don't know if you want to add anything more about that, but it's essentially allowing it. And when we discussed this with during our bond upgrade briefing that we gave to the S&P analysts, they were very complimentary towards a dual-pronged approach to dealing with this particular issue. So we feel it's a beneficial way to deal with it. So we would still look at putting money in our special purpose stabilization fund in the fall through our reserve policy, and then as we hire new employees, we would start funding, and I think it's, what, about $2,500 a year, roughly, that we'd put in for each new employee that we hired, and that would, you do that year after year, and that helps to sort of negate their OPEB liability for the future because you're saving for it right from the beginning of it.
Yeah, essentially, municipal employees are now pretty much funding their own pensions. We're trying to get to a point where they're pretty much paying their OPEB liability at the same time.
Questions on that? It sounds complicated, which it is. Article 21 is related to the Municipal Improvement Committee. As I mentioned, we started in December. This article, we're asking the town to vote on changing the bylaw, Chapter 42 of the general bylaws related to municipal improvement. We're looking to ask to change the name from municipal improvement to capital improvement. It's typically the generally accepted term out there for the work that this particular group does. We just felt it's better to get in line with really to make it sound like what it is that we really do. So one was to request that we change the name. The second was the committee felt that having 7 members instead of 5 would allow a little bit more diversity on the committee. Plus, there's also a lot of work that's being done, and we think that going from 5 members to 7 members is not only manageable, but be prudent for a lot of the long-term planning that we need to do as we build a 5, 10, and a 20-year capital plan for the town. And then we asked that at least one permanent member on that would be the Director of Public Facilities. I think it makes sense to have that particular, office, if you will, have a permanent spot on that committee, and then as the Board of Selectmen chooses to round out with, other 6 folks representative from our community. So that's really the second paragraph under paragraph B. And then if you look at the actual bylaw, there's a paragraph in there that makes the Municipal Improvement Committee sound like a building committee, which it really isn't. And so we've asked to change that particular language to basically say that the committee could recommend to the Board of Selectmen for certain extensive capital improvement projects, public safety facility, a school, or whatever, that they appoint a building committee specific to the performance management of that particular project. It's not really in the Municipal Improvement Committee's wheelhouse, if you will, to develop the capital plan, then turn around and actually manage projects, enter into contracts, evaluate the actual construction, because that's kind of what it reads as right now. So those are the changes that we're asking for related to the Municipal Improvement Committee. Any questions on that, comments or anything? All right, the next several articles, I'm going to turn...
Question, though. Mr.
Yes.
Yeah. It's only, why is the words municipal 5, 2, 3, numbers, names, words crossed out on the article?
Well, essentially what you do when you establish a committee is looking for the different terms. So when you add from 5 members to 7 members, what that's telling you is when you first establish the committee, how you're going to break up the terms to make sure that you're only turning over a certain number each particular year, so you have continuity. So that's all that is.
And the municipal scratch capital?
Right, because we're changing everything that says municipal to capital. So it'll be the capital.
Would it be final before this got printed out and finalized, when it had been printed out as saying that?
Well, you have to show the folks where the changes are,
Oh,
right? And if it gets approved, then basically, essentially, you accept all the changes, and then all that will disappear. So that just shows the folks so they can see clearly what's actually being requested to be changed. And it's sort of transparent. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Strasburg, Nat Strasburg, our town planner, to discuss the next several articles related to zoning.
Thanks, Tony. Article 22 is in regard to updated flood insurance rate maps, updated by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The floodplain overlay district in section 8.1 of the zoning refers to various map panels and particular dates in relation to those maps. Because of the update, the language is being updated to dovetail with new updated maps. That's really the purpose of this. If you go to the end of that article, you'll see a number 5, which has been added to section 8.1.4. That is to enhance the ability to regulate subdivisions to accommodate floods.
How many folks were affected roughly? It was about 600 folks who were affected either positively or negatively. Some folks were in, some folks were in the floodplain that aren't anymore, and then there's some that weren't that now are. I think there was roughly about 600 maybe residents that were affected one way or the other. So they've all been sent letters, and I know they had a planning up in Southport. You could probably
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
comment. It was well attended?
It was extremely well attended. We
Yeah.
had over 100 people there. And there were, I think it was 610 or so that
Okay.
received letters in Ashland. And let me just comment that if this does not get approved by town meeting, then people who are in a floodplain are unable to purchase flood insurance. So it's really a requirement that this article gets approved by town meeting in order to allow residents of the town to purchase
Yeah,
flood
it'd be bigger
insurance.
negative if it wasn't.
It would
correct.
be a
Yeah,
huge
negative. Right.
Article 23. I get a lot of paper from a lot of applicants on a daily basis. It's a paper-intensive job. And some of the paper can be digital instead. And so this says that the amount of paper that I receive should be reduced to smaller sizes, to fewer amounts. PDFs should be used to replace some of this paper. I think it's an important step in the right direction. The big thing here, though, is that right now in the regs, it says that a site plan review process shall last 45 days, 180 days, and 120 days. Precedent has been 120 days, and that's how we've been progressing with the planning board, but it's time to set this in stone and make this clear, because right now it's pretty murky with all of these different numbers in here. And so we've crossed out the language to focus on 120 days. Yes?
Many times.
The last bold sentence on page 10 of this handout says, "Failure by the planning board to vote a decision before the end of the review period shall be deemed approval of the plan." Does that mean that if, for whatever reason, whether it's a good reason or a bad reason, maybe they couldn't get a quorum or there was a flood or who knows, whatever the reason might be, that plans could be approved in this town without our elected planning board overseeing the process and ensuring that the town's best interests are protected?
In fact, they can right now, because if you have a site plan review process and the process ends, and the planning board ends within the 120 days, the planning board has not taken any action on it, it's approved. So this makes that very clear.
Could we make it clear that it doesn't end at that point? And that under no circumstances will a plan be approved without the approval of our planning board?
That's a valid point, Joel.
And is that amendable within the four corners on town meeting floor?
I believe so. Tomorrow night, the planning board is going to have a public hearing on all of these articles, and they'll be considering how to proceed. And so please attend and express that
I'll
comment.
be happy to.
Okay. I have no doubt. I have no doubt.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Article 24, site alteration special permit. A special permit is a process that requires a number of different criteria to be met in terms of how the application is evaluated and how it's processed when the initial application is brought in. But if the language says site alteration permit, if it doesn't say site alteration special permit, it's not very clear to the town planner or to the members of the planning board exactly how such a site alteration permit would proceed. And so it turns out that there is no such thing as a site alteration permit. It's a site alteration special permit. And putting those words in there is a big deal. And I think it really clears things up for us. So that's why we're going about this change in Article 24. Article 25 is divided into a number of different sections. Item 1, 2 new definitions are being added into Section 10 of the bylaw. They are drive-through and drive-through only facility. We have facilities that are drive-throughs in town. We ought to have a definition in the zoning bylaw for a drive-through. And so this is the definition that's being proposed. There are also facilities, if you've been on Route 9 in Natick and you've seen a Starbucks there, or if you've been in West Roxbury, you've seen a Dunkin' Donuts perhaps, where you are able to drive to the location, but you are unable to enter it. That's called the drive-through only facility. We do not have a drive-through only facility in town in Ashland, but the proposal is that a definition for such a facility be added. I have no proposals for such facilities right now on my desk, nor have I heard of any. But this is something that is new, and it's something that it's felt should be added in there. Item 2, restaurant fast food. The definition has been revised slightly. I'll just read it through. An establishment whose principal business is the sale of pre-prepared or rapidly prepared food directly to the customer in a ready-to-consume state for consumption either within the restaurant building, and we're adding in the parking lot or off premises, and usually requires ordering food at a counter or a drive-through window. The reason why this is germane now is because we had Dunkin' Donuts through the planning board, we had Dairy Queen through the planning board, and we've been thinking a lot about this. And so this is a revision that we feel is appropriate at this time. Item 3 is actually divided into 3 different sub-items. So item A of item 3, a restaurant is permissible in the Highway Commerce District, Downtown Commerce, Village Commerce, Neighborhood Commerce, and Industrial. But Neighborhood Commerce District, which lies along Route 135 from approximately Metropolitan Avenue to approximately the intersection of 135 and Main Street, it's a small zone, and it's residential. And so the thinking was we would like to enhance the residential character of the zone or protect the residential character of the zone rather than allow a restaurant to be introduced into that zone. That was the motivation for crossing the yes to a no.
I've got a question on that.
Yes?
Hold on.
You sent me one over here. Okay, 135
Yes.
is by the lights at intersection, across the street from Sudbury River.
Mm-hmm.
There's an open space, small open space, that has the America's Boulevard Pfeffer sign on it.
Yeah.
What's that classified as,
I think that space is beyond the end of the zone.
and why?
I don't know exactly the history of why the zone was put where it was. I'm afraid I can't speak to that.
And why would you say 135 in the intersection?
The zone overlays the uses, the lots adjacent to 135, roughly between Metropolitan Avenue and between the intersection of Main and 135.
At 135, going up towards the hill, towards the high school, off to the right, that's a veer off. Is that considered an intersection or 135?
The zone is terminated by that point on the road.
So how far from Metropolitan, can you name the ending spot for Metropolitan Ave East?
It ends just at the intersection of Metropolitan Avenue.
Which is by the, where Dairy Queen says moved?
Before the commercial plaza, right? But just before the commercial plaza,
Oh, by K Plaza.
Yeah.
just before you hit the plaza.
Okay. And I want to just go back to the drive-through only facilities established and the contact of customers in or out of vehicles. How's that going to affect the project on 126?
Which project are you talking?
The project, one more time. Thought it was done. Comprehensive plan, what we had that charrette for.
Mhm.
What's that gonna do to the zoning for those that are there now, established businesses? Honeydew, Dunkin'
I think it's
Donuts,
just a definition,
McDonald's.
right? It's just a definition, right?
Yeah, these are just definitions in the zoning bylaw. They're not descriptions of regulatory elements of the zoning.
If they get passed by town meeting, they're gonna be coming into fruition, won't they?
They're becoming what?
Just definition.
They're just
They'll be coming
definite.
in definition, but people are gonna be if you pass it at town meeting, how
People-
you as planning board is gonna be using those as a way of working together on.
Okay. But I think I understand your question. If an application for a drive-through comes onto my desk or comes before the planning board, how are we going to know if it's a drive-through? We're going to look to this definition. This definition is going to orient us to that process. But maybe it's a drive-through only facility. This now allows us to distinguish between the two. So I think it will allow us to get started perhaps more easily than before. Get the ball rolling a little bit more easily than before. Is that what you were asking?
That's the way I was trying to come up. I know I came around kind of log, but yes, that's the way. And if it's gonna be that way, town meeting's gotta pass it, and then you gotta be working together to work. Work together.
Correct.
Awesome.
Quick question, is there any other place in town that is zoned in the CN?
No. No.
Thanks.
Thank you. I want to address the very last line on page 12 here, which says, "No access via Pond Street."
Oh, I was just going to get to
I'm
that.
sorry. Go ahead. I'll wait for you to explain it.
No, sure. Okay. So this is a very interesting part of the zoning code. So right now along Pond Street, restaurant fast food uses are permitted. No access via Pond Street says that even though you have these uses permitted, these uses cannot directly access Pond Street. And so this is an issue that came up with Dunkin' Donuts. This is an issue that came up with Dairy Queen. And it made the zoning quite unclear and confusing for a lot of folks. Is this a ban on the use? If so, this is a very weak and ineffective ban. What is this piece of language exactly? What's the purpose of it? And I think that's something that a lot of folks have been struggling with, and it's just not clear. And that was sort of the motivation for crossing this off.
Well, we can debate that.
Absolutely.
I don't agree
Absolutely.
that was the motivation.
That's fine.
I won't go into that.
That's fine.
But what I do want to cite here,
Yes.
relative to this meeting, is that I don't think the way this is worded on here
Mhm.
is clear in the implication of what we would be voting for or against.
Okay.
What this does is it takes what is, according to Town Council Adam Costa during either the Dunkin' Donuts or Dairy Queen hearing,
Mhm.
that we have effectively put a moratorium on fast food access on Pond Street. That's what we have in effect, and it is legally binding. Go watch the videotapes. And what this does is take what is a legal moratorium on fast food businesses gaining automobile access to Pond Street and puts it under the discretion of a planning board that, even with that in effect, voted to permit Dairy Queen and Dunkin' Donuts, with Dairy Queen specifically giving them motor vehicle access to Pond Street. So I think this weakens, if one's
fast food,
position
though.
is that we should have a moratorium, I think this significantly weakens what we currently have. And I think burying it with a little asterisk in italics at the end of all this coded zoning code information is not clear as to the impact what we'd be voting on, and what the impact of that would be. And I hope that can be clarified a little bit more in the way the article is written.
Well, in terms of lack of clarity, the little asterisks and the cross-off are exactly how the language is found in the zoning code. So that, at the very least, says that our zoning code is not clear. But to your major point about the moratorium, I need to brush up about the nature of that moratorium. And so between now and tomorrow night, I may contact Mr. Costa to learn more about that. And so I will be better prepared tomorrow night to understand the ramifications of that.
During the hearing, Mr. Dudley stated that he said that we can't uphold this ban on motor vehicle access to fast food because it would be against the law as a moratorium.
Okay.
And Mr. Costa responded, actually, your zoning code, that it's very clear that it is a moratorium effectively, because no fast food business could survive really without motor vehicle access. And he said it's perfectly legal, and whether that was the intent of the zoning or not, that's what currently is in effect.
You got to come tomorrow night.
I'll be there.
Okay. Okay. Please.
Just one other comment on,
Yes.
on item B.
Yes.
We have the Pond Street Revitalization Group and all of that planning and all of that energy.
Yes.
And all of that effort, and that planning is nowhere near finished. This seems to preempt and tie their hands in a very unacceptable way.
Mm-hmm.
And I would question what the rush is to get this particular piece in here now about Pond Street and about all of the drive-throughs. I think that other process, out of respect for that process and all the people that have put a lot of time and energy into it, that should be allowed to play itself out. And they should be allowed to complete their planning process without being hamstrung by something that another group, albeit the planning board, comes up with. I don't understand why it has to be done now and why it's preempting their process, which is unfortunate, not necessary, and I think disrespectful to those folks and the people in the community who've been engaged in that. So just a message for the planning board in case I'm not there tomorrow.
That's an extremely valid point, and I've heard it from a lot of folks, and I'll certainly relay that message to the planning board, and I'm sure we'll hear that quite a bit tomorrow night. Thank you for the message.
Item C.
Oh, item C.
Yep, okay. So item C. Thank you. All right, so right now when you have a use, like a restaurant or a bank, and there's going to be a drive-through as an accessory use with that use, both are regulated through separate processes. They're not regulated in the same process. So you might have to have a special permit for the drive-through and a site plan review for the restaurant. You don't lump them all together when a regulatory board evaluates them. And so having a definition like restaurant drive-through, what we've done is we've pulled drive-through out and put it into its own accessory use to sort of reflect that reality that each element is evaluated separately. I think that's clearer. It makes the zoning clearer. H, you see drive-through only facility again, and that refers back to this new typology of a drive-through facility, and I think that's very appropriate for the code as well. The final planning board related article is Article 26. So as I'm sure many of you know, or all of you know, at the last town meeting, a solar photovoltaic overlay district was approved, and the extent, the confines of that district are coterminous with the industrial district, rail transit district, B and E, and that's it. That's it, actually. So right now, we're not saying that we want to expand this overlay. We don't want to expand the overlay right now. But what we are saying is that should this overlay be expanded at some point in the future into a residential district, whether it take up an entire residential district or a piece of a residential district, for an applicant to move forward with installing this equipment, a special permit would be required from the planning board. So that's the bulk of what this says. There are a couple other items which I'm going to touch on as well. We talk about buffering. 8.3.6.1 Currently, the language says, where a lot abuts a residential district, the front yard, side yard, and rear yard shall not be less than 50 feet. So we're changing that language. We propose to change that language to where the lot abuts or lies within a residential district, the front yard, side yard, and rear yard shall not be less than 25 feet. That's the proposed change there. And I'll just touch on the final element. We're maintaining that for any installation that should move forward, a stamped and signed landscape architectural plan indicating how the installation will be sufficiently buffered from residential neighbors shall be produced. That's the first section. And the second section, the second item is, such plan shall require a minimum of 8-foot tall vegetative screening from adjacent uses and shall include a maintenance plan lasting a duration of at least 5 years. That's it.
Can you explain why the reduction from 50 to 25 feet?
Sure. Tony, do you want to speak to that, or shall I?
Yeah, I think, well, part of it was, originally I think the 50 feet was for, at the time, I think industrial areas that buffered up against residential. We wanted to give the planning board the ability to look at, instead of just saying 50 feet, each project to be able to look at on its own merits, to not necessarily restrict the size of the array. For instance, like at the House Street landfill, 2 of the sides are surrounded by, essentially what is a camp? There's no houses there or anything. So you really need to be 50 feet in on that side versus perhaps on the left-hand side, you look at, that is a residential property there. So you can adjust the buffering based on the individual project, where the piece of property actually lies. Because if you just say, we're just going to do 50 all the way around to cover the universe, some may not necessarily require that distance of buffering, and you end up, reducing the size of your potential, solar project.
We also have the language shall not be less than, which means that we can obviously increase it to 100 feet or 200 feet, or, it's not locked into 25 feet.
And it's not locked into 50 either.
It's not locked into 50 either.
But you can't go less.
You can't go less.
I understand that. I'm just wondering, House Street is one situation, but if there is someplace else that's closer to someone's home, how the homeowner is going to feel about having it be 25 feet away from their property as opposed to 50. And I understand that it makes the array smaller, and therefore the benefits of the solar are less. But I also have a concern for respecting homeowners' property, which is the biggest investment that a lot of people ever make in their entire lives, and it's their biggest asset. And they pick a community or a neighborhood for a particular reason, the surroundings or whatever, so.
Yeah, I think well, maybe I didn't say it the best way, but I think in that particular case, then the planning board can say, because of that, they're going to set 50 or 75, right? So it's not that, if a project's going to go in, that they automatically, it's going to be 25 feet from the homeowner's, side yard, that if they look at that based on the property and say, it makes sense in that case for this particular side of the property to be 50 feet or 75 feet. So, I guess granted, it puts the onus on the planning board to make those decisions, but that's, I guess that's what they get.
I understand that, and I guess what I would say is that it's less protection for the homeowner, because then it's an uphill fight for them if they want 50 as opposed to 25, and the regulation says the planning board is well within its rights to say 25. I think there's more protection for the homeowner if it's 50. And I was just curious about why it was reduced.
No. Oh, to put it in the overlay does, but not the buffer.
I want to mention that I was at the hearing where we talked about all these things, and the 50 foot, I went away with the idea that it was going to be 50 feet. And a lot of people that were at that meeting thought it was going to be 50 feet.
Does that have a hearing?
When this came up,
No.
yeah, when this came up at the sustainability meeting, our last one, we were surprised when it was put back to 25 feet. And I'm sure that there were definitely a number of people on the sustainability committee that were not happy with that change. They feel like Roberta says that they wanted to protect the homeowner, especially with all the problems we already had. They thought that people would feel happier with it. That's it.
So, just to clarify, the event that you were at was a public discussion?
Right.
So the first public hearing, the only public hearing is going to be tomorrow night, and that's when things are going to get locked in.
So for the benefit of us and the people at home, tell us exactly when that meeting is going to be, the planning board meeting tomorrow evening, that's April 25? Oh, they won't even see it by then.
This won't get shown before tomorrow.
I'll be darned. Isn't that wonderful? Well, tell us anyway.
I would love to. I would love to. Planning board meeting is going to be tomorrow evening, April 24th, beginning at 7:15. 7:30 will be the first warrant article, and then we'll be burning the midnight oil. We'll be going all night.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Is there a reason why the maintenance plan only needs to have, is a duration of only 5 years, at least 5 years, and not in perpetuity?
That's a good question. A lot of people were talking about this. Some people said 10 years, some people said, perpetuity, but I guess the board sort of settled on 5 years.
It's disturbing.
It's disturbing.
But I don't think you'd ever see probably in perpetuity, only because most of these, if you look at these larger solar arrays, usually it's going to be a lease, a 20-year lease. We're at the end of that. Typically, the array, it's written into the contract that whoever put the array up needs to essentially put the site back the way it was.
Yeah.
Right?
So the life of the project.
But it could be the life of the project.
be.
Sometimes those projects would be, in this particular case, if you did the landfill, which is on a piece of public property, you'd sign a lease for 20 years. At the end of the 20 years, you'd have either the ability to say, okay, take it all away and put it back to grass, or the town could say, hey, it's still functioning, still has useful life, the town wants to take it over. Then, obviously, you could extend the, the maintenance plan or whatever to ensure the trees still stay there. But I think for the most part, once you get trees growing and stuff, I'm not sure exactly how much maintenance you have to put in them, but, they just keep growing.
But this doesn't specify that it's strictly for the trees. I mean, I would think it's for the solar array itself, as well as for the land underneath the array, so in case it needs regular mowing or
I'd be happy to bring that up
maintaining.
tomorrow night.
Yeah, that's a good question about them in a row.
I'd be
right?
happy to bring that up.
Thank you.
I think the question that's being raised here in a variety of ways, be it the distance or the maintenance of screening and so on, is that we're talking about taking something that right now is primarily an industrial use, like a large solar array, ground-based solar array.
Oh, I can go back
know
to
there's
that,
some overlay issues. And we're talking about authorizing the town to, or the planning board to place those into residential areas. And I guess the broader question
That has
is-
to go to town meeting, Joel? I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, if we add anything to the overlay, it's a town meeting vote, not the planning board?
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
so-
At that point, I guess the question is, to what degree are we protecting the residents? And, if it's 20, if we cut it from 50 feet to 25 feet, is the message not that we're protecting the residents to the degree to which the planning board deems appropriate, rather than what we put in our code here? In other words, at 50 feet, the residents have 50 feet as a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about reducing, or possibly reducing, the protection that we give to the residents. When we talk about ensuring that the screening, whatever that might be, a fence or plantings or whatever it would be, is maintained for a period not to exceed 5 years, in other words, it ends at that point, are we saying that in a 20-year solar array project, we are about to vote to say to our residents, we'll protect you for a part of the time, but you can't expect us to protect you for the whole life of this large industrial project? Is that the message?
Well, and it's not intended to be the message. I mean, I think
I'm sure.
part of but I think the public hearing tomorrow is really the venue to discuss that with the planning board and let everyone's feelings be known about exactly the things that everybody has brought up here tonight, to get them to, take that into consideration and perhaps change that based on the feelings of everybody. So remember, these particular articles haven't been through the public hearing process yet, so that's tomorrow night, which will give the opportunity. It's certainly not the message we're trying to send, but but if the message is being heard that way, then we need to address that to make sure that we're, considering the best interests of, the folks that'll be abutting these potential projects. So, all the points are very well taken. I mean, you may have even convinced me, so, which is good, since it was my idea, apparently, which I don't mind owning up to, and I,
I got one last thing, please. Okay. The
similar to
very,
what you talked to me that.
the very beginning of the article itself is about, as a right of sight, as a right of sight on large scale, page 13 in the middle.
As of right sighting, yep.
Yep. Ground mounted solar photovoltaic installation. How big are these things going to be?
You mean big in terms of height? You mean big in terms of size? So typically for a solar array, you get about 1 megawatt of solar for 5 acres. So when you look at the landfill as one option, that was 0.75 megawatts. It's not a very big site. Now, if you look at the landfill in where my home used to be, I guess, I visit every once in a while on the Cape, I was happy to see they're finally putting, solar on the Harwich landfill. 4.5 megawatts. It's enormous. It's a lot of energy. That'll run more than probably what the town uses. So for size, from that standpoint about how much energy you can produce on one of these, you roughly get about 1 megawatt per 5 acres.
Okay, what I'm getting at in construction and all that, the biggest site in Ashland would be the railroad district. The work.
Rail Transit District?
Yes. Now, is that the first target for this overlay district?
It's already, no, because it's already in, it's already has as of right siting for solar because of where it is.
And do they have that same boundaries of 25 to 50 up there?
No, because it doesn't abut residential space.
So if this hits a smaller area other than the railroad district, would the smaller area be guided by the 25, 50 feet, if it's smaller?
If it abutted residential district, yes.
Well, if it's not, other than residential, let's say you have a,
Well, there's some in industrial too, right? This is 50 feet. Yeah.
you have a, let's say 20 acre. And you want to put those solar array in, but it's still, it's less than a third of the size of the railroad district, or district, the overlay district. How many and what size lots do you need to put those in? Because there's got to be some broken ground, some placements of them, and how much room are going to be taken by how many you're going to want to put in on the site.
Well, I'd have to say it depends. I mean, each site is different, so I think you'd have to be really specific about the site you're talking about, how many acres it is, how much of it is suitable for, a solar array. Some lots have slopes on them that may not be suitable for, putting panels on. So, I mean, each one would really need to be looked at individually, determine how much solar you could actually fit on it based on its topography and other factors.
Okay, so why would, in a third choice, if all places weren't there, why would a residential be threatened with these things if you got the other places?
Well, first of all, I mean, the rail transit district is a private property. I mean, that's not owned by the town. So, again, nobody's to say whether they're going to put solar there or not. I mean, hopefully they will someday. But, I think each individual project needs to be looked at on its own merits. And, if there's property near a residential district, I think we heard tonight that, giving residents more of a buffer is a prudent move. So, I think that's, the important, takeaway from all this discussion is that it's probably important to ensure that residents' home values and everything, and you give them as much, buffer as you can.
Okay. The reason why I'm bringing this up because at one planning board meeting, there was a agenda item for the photogenic to go on house streets.
Yep.
But there was a zoning amendment that said they couldn't because it was residential and it didn't have a buffer. It was all open space and wide open in the residential area. That's why I'm asking about the overlay district. You're saying that's private property.
No, House Street's not. House Street's public. I mean, that's town-owned property.
Yeah,
So when you establish the overlay district, which currently just includes, the industrial area, which already had solar in the two pieces of the rail transit district, if you wanted to take House Street and put solar on it, the first thing you'd have to do is go to town meeting and request that that parcel of land be then picked up and added to the overlay, right? That's, first and foremost, and then the zoning then would apply to the project for that piece of property. The setbacks, the buffering, the screening, and all the other pieces of the large-scale voltaic, bylaw, right? So that's what you have to do first to make that happen. You have to add it to the overlay first, which would be something that would go to town meeting to be approved.
And because of the railroad district is private, are they excluded from all that?
No, they still come under the same bylaw, but they're part of the as-of-right siting as it exists. So they're in the overlay, I think, already, right? Because they were already approved for as-of-right solar, just like the industrial areas were. Did I get that right?
I'm just thinking overlay and private property up there. This would be saying you can have it, but you're gonna have an expansion better because it's a private property.
I think it just gives the town or any potential developer more options as to where a solar array could be sited. I think really that's all this would do, is it expands the district to not only include private land, but also land abutting residential areas.
So it's optional.
Town meeting has to vote to accept it, so
So
right
the town
now it
meetings have
doesn't.
the option of saying yes or no.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Good? All right. Just very briefly at the end, I skipped over Article 17, I'll cover it real briefly. A year ago, the town approved the establishment of a field enterprise fund. Finally went through the process, approved by the governor, and Article 17, when we get to town meeting, we'll actually have the budget that was just approved by the school committee and the Board of Selectmen input into that article for the Department of Public Works in conjunction with the public facilities and the school department to then pick up the management and operations of several of our school and town athletic fields, which was previously done by the Ashland Fields Management Group, who are essentially finishing up their work and will, cease to perform these functions as of 30 June this year, and the town will end up taking over the management of the fields through the enterprise fund. All right, that's it in a nutshell. And you know what? It's exactly 9 o'clock. We hit it right on the nose.
Do you want to announce the next one?
Oh yeah. So, not that we expect you to come to 2 of these, but we'll do a better job of making sure we hit all the important outlets out there, because we are going to have another one of these on May 1st at this time at the Ashland Public Library. That'll be at 6:30 on May 1st, so a week from tonight. So we appreciate everybody coming and look forward to seeing you at town meeting.